did back in those days. You know, we didn't think we were poor because we had all we needed, but looking back at it, we probably were.
I only had one pair of shoes, well, two pair, one for school and one for dress. And then sometimes in the summertime, I would go barefooted a lot.
Westward we go toward the last buffalo.
My journey of discovery began innocently enough with a borrowed film camera and a desire to learn something about my family's history. How I tumbled from a long weekend in the Flint Hills into 4 decades of photography, publishing, and advocacy is beyond me. And it is beyond me. And I can't believe that I blinked and I've gone from this 18-year-old freshman at KU poking around in the Flint Hills to kind of a beyond middle-aged person. I had a cousin an older cousin who I was really close to, and some of you have heard this story before or read it on the website, and he was a good storyteller, and he really helped fill in some of the blanks for me on my family. And I really wanted to record him and get those stories, and I waited too long. I put it off about 3 times, and the 3rd time was one time too many. And I deeply regretted that, and I had been thinking about doing this for a while, and I just launched in, and I happened to run into a gentleman at a mulligan, a get-together in Wabaunsee County, who was with the museum board there, and they had been wanting to do something similar, and so I just jumped at the chance. They helped me get started, and then about that time, Pioneer Bluffs' mission changed somewhat to be more involved in ranching heritage, and so I called Lynn or whomever, and they agreed to help me out, which I'm forever grateful for both of these entities stepping up to help me do this. I just can't believe I get to do it. It's so much fun. In this last round, I was really tickled pink. I worked with Jim Hoy as an advisor and helping me out on the first 2 rounds. And when I thought maybe there was an opportunity to focus on women, I knew Farrell had a project going that would parallel this in some way, or that they could dovetail, and I reached out to her, and she said, sure, I'll do it, and that thrilled me. It's been really fun to get to know Farrell better and to work with her.
So my memories as of when I was a kid do go back to the limitations that we had with the lack of power. We had rationing, we had World War II to cope with, and so I remember some of that a little bit vividly, and consequently the things that came after, maybe I've had a good feeling about and felt very fortunate. Sure, everybody has a calf in the basement and one that doesn't make it. And yeah, well, I never did the bathtub too much. We usually had some basement. We could heat him up down there. And after we've been married, we always had electrical power, which was step up. Did have a little adversity there when we had a house that flooded 42 inches deep. And we spent the night perched in a tree with the dog on the roof and my cat collection of old cat, young cats. Clint would throw them up on the roof as they swam through the water to us. And, you know, we've got some really interesting little memories like that, but it makes the rest of life look pretty good.
You were a teacher, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you went through the polio thing.
Yes, but I was teaching. I taught I was a home economics home demonstration agent for a couple of years before we were married. Yay, K-State. And then I continued to teach on through until our daughter was born. And then we got pretty busy, and I had plenty of hands to feed at home and so forth.
But some people had asked me about the polio in comparison with the COVID. And I was in high school. Of course, there were only 14 of us in my class, but one of the kids ended up with it. I can't remember if he was in an iron lung or not. He did not come out crippled. But I don't remember a great deal about it. as far as everybody was afraid, and I think it was over 6 years before they actually came up with a vaccine. But I don't ever remember not going to school because of it. Do you?
Well, I went to a one-room school, and there really was only a handful of us there, and I don't remember not going. I do remember how universally everybody adapted to the idea of having a vaccine that would prevent it. And we had 4 or 5 youngsters in Eureka that had it. A couple came out crippled, and 3 or 4 did not make it.
You would have been in high school or out of high school by then?
I don't know.
1952 or...
I graduated from high school in 1950.
Okay, you would have probably been out. I was in high school in 53. Or I
Yeah.
graduated in 53.
But, you know, people and the things that we have to deal with various medical problems is as varied now as the type of treatment that we give animals and the antibiotics that we have for animals, the vaccines that most of these ranchers are utilizing. You know, it's just very different.
Yeah, we didn't have doctors, we did our own.
Well, if you cut your finger, you better have a way of bandaging it.
Some bacon, wrap some bacon around it and then heal it up.
Well, I thought, I don't know, I may be the oldest person here. Yeah. My friend here, I'm 2 years older than she is, so if you can add
How old she is.
89 and 2, you'll get it, I guess.
You're just a kid.
You know, when you get to this age, you can tell a lot of stories, and there's very few people to correct you.
You're all just kids.
Yeah.
I'm 94.
Congratulations. I'm 91, and I married an older man. He's 92 and a half. But I think one of the things, going back to my early days, that changed for us as a family and how we operated on a ranch, when Pearl Harbor happened, those boys in the bunkhouse went to the war. So guess who got called on to get on the horse and do more than they had done before? But who could want a better life than that? And also, the stories I hear about farming, I have always been connected with probably a strictly grass operation. So I don't think we could handle machinery too well. I don't think any of us have that aptitude.
Well, I grew up in a dairy barn, and they used to have a dairy. But I was from out in central Kansas, I guess you would say, at Burdett. And I was born in 1935 in the Dust Bowl days, and so I heard all those stories, which I'll share with her someday. We didn't get to that, so.
That'll be for your book that you're going to write.
I want to
You're gonna write.
I want to talk about our dairy a little bit. My husband didn't think we could make a living farming, so just farming. So we took on dairying too, and that kept us busy on both ends. We had an old barn that we fixed up a little bit and put a kitchen cabinet in it that had a place for money, for change. And we filled glass gallon jars and put in the refrigerator that was in the milk room also. And people would come, leave their money in the cabinet, take their milk out of the refrigerator and sign a little pad about who got the milk and how much money they left. and went on their way. And we'd go check the barn about every 3 or 4 hours to see if we needed to pour more milk. One time we went to Hutchinson to my brother's for Christmas, and my brother-in-law was going to look after the milk business for us. And he was never so happy in his life when we got home. He had poured every drop of milk we had in the milk tank. And all he got done all day was come and pour milk, wash jars and pour milk. And I don't think there was any work that we enjoyed any more than milking cows and selling milk.
And it wasn't pasteurized, was it?
Oh, no, it wasn't anything. It was plain old raw milk. But it was good stuff.
I doubt if it killed anybody either.
I don't think it killed anybody. Didn't hear of it anyway. Let's see. I've got a follow-up story on Linda the horse. We found out long after she was gone, and we'd forgotten about her, that she had been used for rodeo stock. And said when you lifted your feet toward her shoulders, she was to buck. So that's why she unloaded everybody. She was a good old horse.
Oh, I guess now I should tell the Zumbra story about the horses that we sold to Rose Zumbraugh's dad and brother. They went to Iowa to the corn farmers, and her dad was an old of German descent, kind of spoke with an accent. So the horse that we sold, Cotton's old horse, he was a good rope horse and a good cow horse, but it was a hair touchy. Like he was a little on the bronky side. And when they tried him out in the pen cutting some cattle, I was like, oh my God, I don't know if this is ever going to work. Well, they hauled him up there, and Mr. Zumbrau would call or write a note telling us how the horse was getting along. Well, first of all, they put him in a pen with an electric waterer. And he had never been in a pen with an electric waterer, and they couldn't figure out why he wouldn't drink. Well, they kind of give you a little shock once in a while, and they make a noise. And so he wasn't going to drink, so they had to do something different. Well, then he sent a picture of his little grandkid or somebody's grandchild on him. And we went, whoa, that's interesting. I didn't ever put a little kid on him. And so then one day he calls and he says, I have a story to tell you. He said, about the horses. He said, you know, up here there aren't a great many cowboys or a lot of horses. But he said, there's a sale barn not far from here, and they got in some cattle that were not really native to this there, which meant they had a little ear, you know. And they got out in about the I think he said 60-acre pasture. And he said they tried for a couple days to get them with the tractors. They had dogs and people and kids, and they could not get those cattle back in. And somebody says, well, I know some guys over here about 20 miles that have some horses that's supposed to be pretty good cattle horse. Maybe we ought to try. So they called him up. They said, well, okay, we'll come give it a try. I don't know about that. He said, we got over there, and here were all these people lined up around there making odds on us. In other words, they were betting whether they could get them in or not. And he said, it took us a while, but we got it done. And so that was the story about the Flint Hills horses in the Iowa corn country. And that was Rose Zumbraugh's dad.
I was interested when you, I think, said that you oftentimes sold cattle directly to the farmer feeders up in Iowa. we had a period of time when we had quite a few connections up there and would do the same thing. And everything, is confined up there. And we had some big red cattle that came up from Texas that grazed with us. And Clint finally got them on the trucks and sent them to some guy up in Iowa. And a few days later, we heard that when they turned them out, they really cleaned the fences and they were out in the cornfield somewhere. So anyway, cattle business is basically cattle business, but you can be a purebred person that keeps a registered herd. You can have a commercial cow herd. You can operate big. You can operate little. You can raise your cattle among the cactus and whatever of some of our drier regions. You can have them down the southeast. But we always have our connections. And they will be different, and they have been different over the years, but there is still a connection, particularly among the Flint Hills.
What was your favorite thing to do for entertainment? I think mine was on Saturdays after we had our lunch, we would get ready and go to town. Mother would take the cream and the eggs and to use for some grocery money. And I would go to the local movie theater. Woo. And we had 2 shows. We had one of the regular shows. There was always a cowboy show, like Tim Mix. And a serial, maybe Flash Gordon. You remember Flash Gordon on a Saturday afternoon? And then after I came out, it was still bright sunlight and I couldn't see too well, and I would find my folks and we would go to the drugstore, have a milkshake. That was the highlight of my whole week.
Well, I don't really know as a child. I think a lot of our activities probably centered around either 1 or 2 rural schools in our neighborhood. And the highlight of the year would be when you had a Christmas program maybe. We also, over at the Fairview School, we had Sunday, I wouldn't call it church, we had Sunday school over there during the summertime. And there would be those kind of things that brought the neighborhood people together.
Well,
Preteen.
I was told I was born with little horses running out my ears, and I guess I was, because I was crazy, horse crazy, from the time I could say horsey. And by then, Dad had sold his, he might have had one team that he sold after I was born. But I was from a family of a good horseman on both sides, apparently. And I got my first horse when I was about 5 years old. Her dad bought a colt. And on, this is funny, on a Welch, out of a Welch mare that was by a small workhorse stud. And he was about as wide as he was tall, but he's about 14 hands. But he brought the mare over before the colt was weaned, and I could ride the mare. And I was about 4 to 5 years old. And from then on, my life was with a horse. I had horses and trained horses. By the time I was 12 and a half, I had trained a trick horse. I'd go out behind the barn. Well, my folks had bought a Jesse Berry School of Horsemanship, and I read it upside down and backwards. And I'd sneak out behind the barn and teach him tricks. And by the time I was 12 and a half, I think he was a year and a half, he'd do all kinds of things. And then I sold him to a clown, and he was on the rodeo circuit as a clown's horse till he was 27. And there's more than that story too. And I've trained horses off and on all my life. And but I was discouraged from just going on and doing it professionally because they said, oh, women don't do that and you can't make any money, which was not true, but I still did a lot of it and rode a lot of colts. I suppose that was my main entertainment outside of I idolized Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, so I saw every movie that I could get my hands on of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans.
Well, I don't remember too much about my grown-up years, but my husband and I went square dancing one night a week after we got the hay baled and the cows milked and the kids put to bed. And I think we enjoyed that more than anything we did in our whole lives, was to drive to Gladys and go square dancing.
Where was Gladys?
It was to the west of Emporia a little bit, behind the drive-in theater.
You did some roller skating too, didn't you?
Yes, I met my husband at the community building, roller skating. We always came to town on Saturday night. Dad went to the pool hall and Mom went to the grocery store. I went to the skating rink.
Did you skate at Cottonwood Falls when they had the skating rink
Yeah,
there?
that's where we met, at that skating
There
rink.
used to be a skating rink where
Well, I called it the community building. That's not
there's
really.
been a lot of things. I mean,
Yeah.
now that's where they have the Saturday night
Yeah.
music.
But that was our fun night out.
Okay, that sounds fun, and that was a great question. Thank you for that, Mrs. Seeley. Anybody in the audience have a question for any of our panelists or all of our panelists?
What'd you ask?
She asked if you ever went to Texas. Cotton was an old Texas cowboy. Did you ever go to Texas?
I've been to Texas, yeah. What do you want to know?
Where is it?
Where is Texas? Well, it's south there somewhere.
35.
35.
35 years. When we got ready to close it down and sell it out, our kids had moved to the dairy and we had moved on down where I live now. And
Just said how many years? How many times did it flood?
oh,
How many times?
many, many,
On the river.
yeah, on the river
And it flooded a lot, I bet.
over the years. 51 was the high when there was 46 inches of water in our house at the dairy. But we stacked things up, and there were a lot of things that we were able to save that we couldn't believe when we got able to get back in.
Mrs. Huntington has some good flood stories too, so stay tuned.
Some of the neighbors would take us in.
Eula, I was going to ask, I know that you grew up on a old-time ranch in this area and pretty close to where we are here now, and just, could you tell just a little bit about your childhood in a real cowboy family and ranching family here in the Matfield area, Valley?
Oh, my family wasn't so much cowboys. My dad worked off the farm when he got older, and my brothers grew up and did odd jobs around until they got through high school, and then they all left the country. My youngest brother lived at Hutchinson, and the rest of them were all out of state. But we did have an old horse off and on, and milked the cows, and I guess the dairy that my husband and I and our family ran was the closest we got to cows. And that was pretty close.
Yeah, it's up close and personal. Yeah. Mark noticed that so many people from Oklahoma from Osage County seem to come up to the Flint Hills. Why? What's the draw there, do you think?
Yes. My dad probably would have stayed in the Osage area, which, Pawhuska is a county seat. But the land there was in such tight hands, so he came. We were in Kansas living at that time on a ranch. And he came up, and we took several trips and looked at some land. And he had a little incident that could have changed his life. About a week after he signed the contract on the land in Kansas, he had a horse accident, fell and hit his head, and tore his retina. He had to go to Oklahoma City. There was a Chinese doctor there that was doing, there weren't many specialists doing retina surgery at that time. He wound up with about 10% sight in that eye. I think if it happened the week before he signed it, he probably wouldn't. So that was providence.
Well, I have a question that I ask at the end of every interview, and so I'll ask it to you all now, and I've asked it before. What do you want the world to know about the Flint Hills? I think we all agree it's a special place. What would you want the world to know about the Flint Hills?
As far as I'm concerned, the Flint Hills is the most beautiful place in the world. And I have lived here for 94 years, never lived out of Chase County. And I wouldn't take anything for my experiences in Chase County and the Flint Hills.
Well, my first trip to the Flint Hills was after the 51 flood. We were going from home for that to Kansas City. I had relatives who lived there, or lived in Liberty. And we came off I, of course, being the horse person that I was, had, just anything ranch. And we came from Marion across to Elmdale. And I was just enamored with the beauty of it. No houses, just pasture. You could get on a horse and ride forever. And we came off the hill, and that was back when they kept the Elmdale sign whitewashed, which the school kids always did every year, last day of school. And there was that great big Elmdale sign down there, and oh my gosh, I thought, this is God's country. And I never thought that I would get to live here, and of course we ended up first at Manhattan, and then down here. But the thing that has really troubled me terribly in the last few years, and I worked for the weed department for, 6 summers, I think, out working musk thistle and stuff. And I have watched the trees take over, starting at Manhattan, moving down. But it isn't only here. It's clear out home. You go out there and there are trees everywhere, and mostly, unfortunately, hedge trees and cedars. And I just come unglued every time I see them, and I think, oh my God, don't let this become the prairie forest. Don't let Kansas become the Prairie or Flint Hills forest. Get the trees out. And it just tears me up. And it's like Barber County when they had the fire here, 3 years ago, the first one. Why, they couldn't fight it. I mean, it'd all grown up in trees, and you couldn't get in there with a truck to fight it. And it's just, there's tree lovers, but, the good Lord had a perfect plan, and man throughout history has been trying to improve upon it, and he hasn't succeeded yet, and he isn't going to. And all of this global warming and stuff, the main thing I think we notice more is that there are more people living in the areas that, otherwise used to change. And then if you go back in history that they have rewritten, that this change has happened over and over again naturally. And just leave it alone and let the Lord's plan work. Otherwise, you might as well forget the Flint Hills, and that would be very sad.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to your problem with cedar trees and hedge trees. And their fire will do a lot for the cedars. But as we get people who tend to live out in the areas, as you say, it becomes a little more difficult to actually have a safe and controlled burn. Now, however, the other thing that is happening down south of where we actually live is there's been a lot of smaller farms down there, and now, of course, they're not being operated as such, and we're getting an influx of people who want to let them be game preserves for their own use. And I'm not unsympathetic to having areas that are set aside for that. But they will let the cedar trees grow up so dense that a poor little deer couldn't even find his way through sometimes. So I think that has to have some management too. But there are things that will kill cedar tree or kill hedge trees, and it may take a serious management program to take care of that. I also have been a little troubled the last few years about the number of smaller ranches and farms that have been consolidated in the ownership of some large absentee owners. And I hope that that does not affect our ability to have privately owned mid-sized ranches in operation. So we'll just keep an eye on it. But if you really want to know the one thing that has changed our operation in the last few years, cell phones. You know, we haven't lost a trucker in the last 10 years. I'm not being sent down to the truck stop. They're not being sent down there and parked all over town when we're shipping in the season. And I'm not being told to go down and you find the trucker that's da-da-da-da-da. You know, you just hope you're knocking on the door of the cab of the right guy. And if not, you end up meeting a lot of sleepy, semi-dressed truckers. I'm all for cell phones.
Well, I'm inclined to think, let's don't advertise this place as much as we have been. Let's keep it quiet as we can so people won't come and see how beautiful it is, and they'll want to come and settle down. And also bothers me somewhat that maybe there are things out on 5 or 10 acres here and there. There are some places that have zoning laws that up that acreage, that might help losing some of the land that we're losing now.
I have a funny story about this, though. I have a acquaintance, friend, kind of interesting lady, who thought that she wanted K-State to come down and to advise her about how that she could get rid of her cedar trees. Well, somebody came down and looked over the situation, and I don't know whether he decided that he would do a little lake pulling or what, but anyway, he told her that she did not have to kill all of her cedar trees, that she only needed to kill one sex, either the male tree or the female tree. And she had told me this, and I was kind of like tongue-in-cheek thinking that over. Well, a few days later, I was headed to Wichita with her on 254, and you go out of El Dorado going that way, and there's several, houses along there with a little acreage that are just solid cedar trees. And she says, "Oh, there's those trees you don't like." And I said, "Yeah." And all of a sudden it hit me. "Hey, did he tell you who you were supposed to get to help sex those trees? Find out which ones you were supposed to cut?" She said, "No, he didn't."
So I think the moral of that story is trust the wisdom of Flint Hills women, not the experts at K-State.
How do you tell?
So it was our great honor. It was our great honor to get to speak with all of you, and thank you for giving your time. Really, your stories are so important, and we're so glad to have them. Thank you.
On westward we go toward the last buffalo, to the high plains of sturdy short grass, where the great southern herd still a sight beyond words, as it covers the prairie so vast. On to Plum Creek and Turkey Creek, Smoky Hill too, our ponies and families walk to the camp.